Ancient Egyptians sailed vast seas guided only by the stars. They crossed the Mediterranean and charted the Nile without a single compass or map. How did they achieve this with nothing but the night sky? By the end of this, you will understand the precise celestial methods that turned their ships into vessels of discovery. We will uncover how they used constellations we still see today as divine roadmaps, and how a star's first morning appearance could predict the flooding of a river. What does it take to navigate a world where the sky itself is your only guide? To them, the sky was not a void but a great, dark river. The Egyptians lived by the rhythms of the Nile, a life-giving highway of water and silt that dictated the seasons. They saw that same order reflected perfectly above. The Milky Way was their celestial Nile, a shimmering band of light flowing through the heavens, and the stars were not random points of light, but divine beings and practical markers sailing upon it. This was a profound mirror world, a cosmic blueprint where every earthly event had a counterpart in the sky. Understanding this celestial map was not a philosophical hobby, it was the key to existence on the ground. Consider the immense scale of their ambitions. To build the pyramids, they needed granite from quarries over 500 miles upriver, requiring the movement of colossal stone blocks on barges. A single wrong turn or a season missed could doom a pharaoh's eternal project. Their trade network stretched across the Mediterranean to Lebanon for cedar wood, and down the Red Sea to the mysterious land of Punt for incense and gold. A fleet lost at sea was an economic catastrophe. Even military campaigns along the Nile's length depended on precise timing and placement of troops and supplies. In a world without magnetic compasses or printed charts, getting lost was not an inconvenience, it was a death sentence for a crew, a financial ruin for a merchant, or a fatal blow to a king's authority. Mastering the stars, therefore, became a sacred science. It was the ultimate source of power, a direct line to the gods who piloted the solar bark and the starry boats of the night. The priest astronomers who could read this divine script held the kingdom's fate in their hands. They were the original navigators, turning myth into mathematics, and the silent night sky into a shouted, unmistakable set of directions. Their celestial map was populated by gods and sacred animals, a pantheon of light that bore little resemblance to our Greek heroes and mythical beasts. To navigate, you first had to know who you were looking for. One of the most crucial figures in their night sky was Mesquidiu. We know it as the Big Dipper, that unmistakable ladle of 7 bright stars. But the Egyptians saw something far more powerful and terrestrial. To them, this constellation was the foreleg of a great bull, severed and set in the northern sky. This was not a random image. The bull was a symbol of immense strength and the pharaoh's own might, and the leg represented raw, unstoppable power. For a sailor on the open water, Mesquidiu was a celestial anchor. Unlike many stars that rise and set, this group of stars, due to its position near the North Celestial Pole, was circumpolar for much of Egypt. This means it never dipped below the horizon. It simply rotated around the true north point in the sky. For a navigator, finding Mesquidiu meant instantly locating north. By observing its slow, nightly pivot, they could judge the passage of time through the night, a steady, unchanging clock hand in the heavens. Then there was Sa. We call this constellation Orion, the hunter. In Egypt, Sa was the celestial manifestation of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, resurrection, and the fertile black soil of the Nile floodplain. The 3 bright stars of Orion's belt were his backbone, the very axis of cosmic order. Sa's appearance and movement were deeply tied to the agricultural and religious calendar. But for navigation, its brilliance and distinctive shape made it a stellar landmark of the highest order. When Sa rose in the eastern sky, it announced a season. Its position relative to other stars could help triangulate a vessel's location, especially when sailing south along the Nile or venturing into the Red Sea. Following Sa was like following a god, trusting that Osiris himself was charting a path through the darkness, but no star held more practical and spiritual weight than Sopdet. We know it as Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in our entire night sky. In Egypt, Sopdet was the goddess who brought the inundation. Her first heliacal rising, which is her first appearance in the dawn sky just before the sun after a period of invisibility, marked the imminent flooding of the Nile. This event was the new year, the single most important date in their entire civilization. For a navigator, the return of Sopdet was the ultimate signal. It meant the Nile would soon overflow its banks, making the river navigable for heavy barges carrying stone for pyramids or grain for temples. It dictated the entire shipping season. To see Sopdet twinkling in the pre-dawn glow was to receive a direct divine command. Prepare the fleet. The time for great journeys is now. These constellations were not static pictures. They were dynamic, living entities. Mesgidiu, the bull's leg, pointed the way. Sa, the resurrected god, marked the seasons. Sopdet, the life-bringer, announced the time to sail. This was the backbone of their system, a sky full of familiar, powerful guides who did more than just decorate the night. They actively steered the course of an empire. But the true masters of the night were not the stars that moved, but the ones that never did. High in the northern sky, a special group of stars performed a slow, eternal dance around a fixed point. The Egyptians called them the Indestructible Ones, a name that captures their profound significance. These stars never set, they never vanished into the underworld. While other constellations rose and fell like characters in a nightly play, the Indestructible Ones were the permanent stage, the unwavering foundation of the cosmos. For a culture obsessed with eternity and the unchanging order of the universe, these stars were the ultimate symbol of permanence. They were the undying spirits of the blessed dead, circling forever in a celestial afterlife. For a sailor on the open sea, or a captain navigating the Nile's dark bends, there was something even more vital, a literal fixed point in a turning world. Among these eternal sentinels, one star held the highest office for centuries. Today, we use Polaris, the North Star, to find true north, but during the age of the Great Pyramids, the star marking the celestial North Pole was a different light entirely. It was Thuban, a moderately bright star in the tail of the constellation Draco, the dragon. For the Egyptians, Thuban was the pivot of the sky, the central nail around which all the Indestructible Ones slowly revolved. Its position was not perfectly at the pole, but it was close enough, and it was the brightest star near that sacred, unmoving spot for over 1,000 years. Imagine you are the captain of a royal barge laden with limestone, sailing at night. The riverbanks are dark, the water is a black mirror, and the only landmarks are the silhouettes of distant hills. You cannot afford to drift. By locating Thuban among the Indestructible Ones, you instantly establish a bearing. You know that direction is north. If your journey requires you to travel due west along a certain latitude, you keep Thuban at a constant angle off your stern or your bow. It becomes your steering star. This was not a matter of rough estimation. The priest astronomers and seasoned river pilots would have known the precise circle Thuban scribed in the sky throughout the night and across the seasons. They could judge their latitude by how high Thuban appeared above the horizon. Sailing south toward Nubia, you would watch Thuban sink lower. Sailing north toward the Mediterranean, you would see it climb higher. This single, unchanging point transformed the chaotic dome of night into a vast, readable compass. Thuban was their celestial cornerstone, the silent, indestructible guide that made long-distance navigation under the stars not just possible, but reliable. It was the one star you could always trust, because the gods had decreed it would never, ever leave its post. The rotation of Mesgidiu, the bull's leg, was the heartbeat of the night. While Thuban marked the still center, the 7 bright stars of the Big Dipper swung around it in a grand, predictable circle. This movement was not just for observation, it was a working tool, a celestial mechanism more reliable than any water clock or sundown could be on a moving ship. For a navigator, this constellation became a giant hand on a 24-hour clock face painted across the heavens. The method was elegant in its simplicity. The key was the alignment of the 2 stars at the end of the Dipper's bowl, the ones we call the pointer stars because they point to Polaris. In the Egyptian system, these were part of the bull's leg bone. By memorizing the position of these stars relative to the unmoving point near Thuban at different times of night and in different seasons, a pilot could tell the hour. If the leg was upright, it might signify midnight. If it was horizontal to the left of the pole, it could mark the 3rd hour of the night. This was not about knowing the exact minute, but about understanding the passage of large, crucial blocks of time during a voyage. But this celestial clock did more than tell time, it revealed direction. Here is where the genius of the method becomes clear. Knowing the time of night from the stars allowed you to deduce your east-west orientation, something incredibly difficult to judge on a featureless river or a dark sea. Imagine you are sailing the Nile. You know from your star clock that it is roughly the 6th hour of the night. You also know that at this hour, at this time of year, the constellation Sa, or Orion, should be rising in the east. You look to the horizon, but you see nothing but haze or hills. You are disoriented, so you look back to your trusted mooring post, Mesquidiu. Its specific tilt tells you the hour is correct. Therefore, the direction where Sa should be rising is your true east. You now have a bearing. Your ship might be drifting with a current, but the sky is not. You correct your course. On the open Mediterranean, the principle was the same but even more critical. Without land in sight, a ship could be turned around by winds and currents in mere hours. By frequently checking the position of the bull's leg against the pole, a navigator could maintain a straight course east or west. They were essentially drawing an imaginary line from the pivot point through the constellation, and that line, changing throughout the night, gave them a constant reference for steering. It was a dynamic compass, one that required deep knowledge and constant observation, turning the slow sweep of eternity into a practical tool for crossing the world. This was not stargazing, it was a rigorous, applied science. The priest who designed a temple's alignment and the captain who delivered its stones were using the same cosmic blueprint, reading time and direction from the same unwavering, indestructible stars. Yet of all the divine markers in their sky, one commanded absolute obedience. Sopdet, our Sirius, was not merely a star. It was a herald of life and death. Its brilliance was unmatched, a piercing diamond in the pre-dawn darkness that seemed to shout its arrival. For roughly 70 days each year, Sirius vanished completely from the night sky, swallowed by the sun's glare. Its return was not a quiet event. The heliacal rising of Sopdet was the moment this star first peaked above the eastern horizon, just moments before the sun itself, a fleeting glimpse in the growing light. To the Egyptians, this was not astronomy, it was a direct celestial telegram. The goddess had returned from her journey through the underworld, and she brought the flood with her. Within weeks of this appearance, the Nile would begin to swell, its life-giving waters spilling over the banks to deposit the rich, black silt that fertilized the entire kingdom. This event was the new year, the absolute foundation of their agricultural, religious, and economic calendar. For the navigator, this single observation changed everything. The heliacal rising of Sopdet was the ultimate starting gun. It meant the Nile's water levels would soon be high enough to allow heavily laden barges, carrying the granite for statues or the grain for royal stores, to travel routes that were impassable shoals just months before. The great river became a superhighway, and the sailing season began in earnest. But Sopdet's utility went far beyond marking a date on a calendar. Its sheer brightness made it a phenomenal navigational beacon. While northern sailors relied on the circumpolar stars, those venturing south along the Nile or out into the Red Sea looked to the southern sky. There, Sopdet shone with a steady, unwavering light. By noting its position relative to the horizon at a given hour, a captain could maintain a southerly bearing. It was a fixed point in the southern heavens, a luminous goalpost for journeys toward the lands of incense and gold. Think of the precision this required. A priest astronomer on a temple roof would watch for that first glimmer of Sopdet in the dawn glow. The very next day, messengers would be dispatched, and the docks would erupt in controlled chaos. Shipwrights made final repairs, scribes tallied cargo manifests, and captains received their sealed orders. The entire logistical machine of the state, from pyramid construction to military campaigns, was synchronized to this one celestial event. To miss the signal was to miss the season, to delay a pharaoh's tomb or let a rival's fleet gain advantage. Sopdet was the rhythm of the empire itself, a pulse of light in the sky that set 1,000,000 hands to work and guided 1,000 ships through the dark. While the northern stars provided an eternal anchor, the southern sky held a ruler of its own. Sa, the constellation of Osiris, dominated this realm with its brilliant stars and unmistakable shape. But for practical navigation, the true prize was its belt. Those three perfectly aligned stars, shining with a fierce blue-white intensity, were more than a symbol of divine backbone, they were a precision tool etched in light. When Sa climbed to its highest point in the night sky, crossing the invisible north-south line astronomers call the meridian, its belt performed a specific, reliable function. At that exact moment, the three stars pointed directly toward the south-southwest horizon. This was not a vague suggestion, it was a celestial signpost of stunning accuracy. For a captain sailing the Nile, a river that flows almost perfectly from south to north, this alignment was a gift from the gods. Imagine a barge traveling upstream from Memphis toward the granite quarries at Aswan. The river winds, the banks look similar in the moonlight, and currents can disorient even the most experienced pilot. As the night deepens, the crew watches Sa climb. When the belt finally reaches its peak, the captain sights along its line. That precise direction is south-southwest. By aligning the prow of his vessel with that bearing, he knows he is steering the true course south, correcting for any deceptive bends in the river. It was like having a divine compass needle suspended in the heavens, resetting its reading each night for anyone who knew how to look. The utility extended far beyond the Nile. For expeditions venturing into Nubia, the land to the south rich in gold and exotic goods, Sa's belt was the guiding light into unknown territory. Once you left the familiar river valley, overland routes relied on star paths. When the belt pointed the way at its zenith, caravans could set their direction through desert or mountain pass with confidence. This celestial marker transformed a vast and intimidating landscape into a navigable space, because the same stars that watched over Thebes also shone above the distant Nubian forts. The beauty of this system was its elegant simplicity. You did not need complex instruments, just knowledge passed from master to apprentice. You learned to recognize Sa, you learned to judge when it reached its highest arc, and you trusted the geometry of its belt. That trust was built over generations of successful voyages, of stones delivered and treasures returned. It was a science encoded in myth, where the backbone of Osiris did not just promise resurrection in the afterlife, but guaranteed safe passage and prosperous return in this one. The southern sky was not a void to be feared. It was a kingdom ruled by a familiar, constant god, and his belt was the scepter that charted the way to empire's edge. The fixed stars were their anchors, but the real intrigue came from the wanderers. Among the thousands of steady lights, a handful moved on their own secret paths, drifting against the backdrop of constellations. The Egyptians called them the stars that know no rest, and they saw them as nothing less than gods in motion. These were the planets, and tracking their complex dances added a sophisticated, dynamic layer to their celestial understanding. While Meskhetiyu pointed north and Sopdet heralded the flood, the wanderers revealed the finer details of time and divine will. Take the planet we call Venus. To the Egyptians, it was both the morning star and the evening star, a single brilliant entity that appeared at dawn in the east, then vanished, only to reappear weeks later at dusk in the west. They associated it with the god of the morning, a celestial herald. Its cycle was predictable yet mesmerizing. A navigator or priest would note its position relative to a familiar constellation like Sa. If Venus was shining brightly near Orion's belt in the pre-dawn sky, it marked a specific phase of its journey, which correlated with specific months and seasonal changes. This was another celestial clock, one with a longer, more intricate rhythm. Then there was Jupiter, a steady, kingly light moving slowly through the zodiac. They linked it to Horus, the sky god, a symbol of kingship and order. Its stately progression from one constellation to another over the course of a year was a marker of longer time periods, useful for planning expeditions that would take many months. A pharaoh commissioning a trading fleet to punt might consult the priests on Jupiter's position, seeking an auspicious alignment for departure, believing the god's favor was literally shining upon the venture. Mercury and Mars, too, had their roles, their reddish or swift movements interpreted as messages. Understanding these paths was not simple stargazing, it was high celestial diplomacy. By plotting where the wandering gods would be on a given night, the astronomer priests could create a more complete, four-dimensional map. It was not just where the stars were, but where the planets would be moving among them. This allowed for incredibly precise timing. Imagine needing to coordinate a rendezvous of multiple supply ships at the Nile Delta from different parts of the kingdom. A message might state, "Sail when Venus stands above the red star in the Scorpion's heart." That was a specific, observable event that everyone, from Thebes to Memphis, could see simultaneously. It was a celestial appointment set by the gods themselves. This knowledge turned the sky from a static map into a living, breathing narrative of divine movement, where every journey on Earth could be mirrored and guided by the restless travels of the gods above. But the sun's journey presented its own unique challenge. While the night sky offered a map of fixed points, daylight brought a single, overwhelming beacon moving relentlessly across a blank blue dome. How could you navigate when your only guide was in constant motion? The Egyptians turned this apparent problem into their greatest advantage, because the sun was not just a ball of fire, it was the god Ra himself, making his daily voyage in a magnificent boat. His path was the most reliable route in the universe. From dawn in the east to dusk in the west, Ra's journey painted a giant, predictable arc across the sky. For any traveler on the Nile, this meant a simple, fundamental rule. In the morning, the sun rising ahead of your boat meant you were generally sailing east. The sun on your right side meant you were heading south. This was the baseline, the celestial logic every child on the river would learn. But the priests and pilots went far deeper, transforming Ra's passage into a precise science of alignment. Their most ingenious daytime tool required no instruments, just a flat surface and a keen eye for shadows. At the exact moment the sun reached its highest point in the sky, what we call solar noon, something remarkable happens. Shadows cast by vertical objects become their shortest, and most crucially, they point directly toward true north in the northern hemisphere. The Egyptians understood this geometry perfectly. A temple architect would drive a simple stake into the ground, a gnomon, and watch its shadow shrink as noon approached. The moment the shadow was at its absolute shortest and sharpest, its direction was a perfect north-south line. This was how they aligned the pyramids with such breathtaking precision to the cardinal directions. On a moving ship, the principle was adapted. A sailor could use a plumb line or even a spear held upright on the deck. By marking the tip of its shadow at intervals as noon approached, he could identify the shortest shadow cast, and thus determine north and south, even while floating on a shifting river. This solar compass worked anywhere the sun shone, turning Ra's zenith into a momentary, perfect anchor point. Yet they rarely relied on the sky alone. Their true mastery lay in synthesis. A captain would combine the sun's position with an intimate, memorized catalog of the river itself. He knew that when the sun was at a certain height behind the distinctive, twin-peaked hill, his vessel was aligned with the deep channel. He knew that the shadow of a certain giant sycamore tree, falling across a specific rock outcrop at mid-morning, marked a safe turning point into a tributary. The riverbanks were not just scenery, they were a terrestrial star chart, with hundreds of fixed landmarks, unusual cliffs, ancient lone trees, man-made cairns, that corresponded to solar positions. Sailing from Memphis to Thebes was not a matter of staring only at the water or only at the sky. It was a continuous dialogue between the two. The pilot would glance at the sun, judge its angle, then look to the bank to find the landmark that should be appearing at that very hour and season. If the landmark was where he expected, his course was true. If it was not, the sun's position told him how far he had drifted. This was integrated navigation, where Ra's celestial boat and the solid Earth worked in concert. The daytime voyage became a ritual of observation and confirmation, a constant reaffirmation of one's place in the world, guided by the most powerful god of all, whose reliable path made the entire kingdom not just visible, but knowable. This celestial knowledge did not remain trapped in the temple observatories. It flowed directly down to the river's edge, where stone met water in a structure of profound practicality. Scattered along the Nile, from the delta to the first cataract, were the Nilometers. These were not mere measuring sticks, but sacred staircases descending into the heart of the river itself. A Nilometer was typically a stone-lined well or a column marked with cubits. connected directly to the Nile by a subterranean channel. Its purpose was deceptively simple: to give a precise numerical reading of the water level. But that number was the pulse of the entire kingdom. Every morning during the flood season, a priest would descend those damp steps, his sandals echoing in the chamber, and record the height of the water against the carved lines. This daily ritual was the most important data collection in the ancient world, yet the number alone was meaningless without its celestial key. The priest on the Nilometer stairs was the same man who, the night before, had stood on the temple roof. He had watched for the heliacal rising of Sopdet. He had noted the exact position of Sa's belt at its zenith. He had tracked the wanderers. His mind held a living archive, generations deep, that linked specific star patterns with specific Nilometer readings from years past. This was the integrated system. When Sopdet appeared and the water was at, say, 18 cubits on the Memphis Nilometer, the priests knew from ancient records that this predicted a strong, but not catastrophic, flood. That data point triggered a cascade of decisions. Farmers from hundreds of miles away would receive the signal, translated into simple instructions, to prepare their fields for planting in a certain number of weeks. But for the navigator, the correlation was even more direct. The Nilometer reading, tied to the stars, told him not just that the flood was coming, but how it was coming. A reading of 22 cubits at Elephantine, correlated with the position of Jupiter in the constellation of the Ram, meant the floodwaters from the southern highlands would be powerful and fast. This told a captain that the upstream journey to the granite quarries would be swifter than usual, but also more treacherous, requiring expert pilots to handle the stronger currents. Conversely, a lower reading with Venus seen in the morning meant a gentler rise, ideal for sending heavily laden grain barges downstream on a predictable, steady current. The stars provided the long-range forecast, and the Nilometer provided the real-time gauge. A ship's captain consulting with a temple scribe before departure would receive not just a blessing, but a data-driven itinerary. Sail on the third day after the full moon, when the water at the Thebes Nilometer reaches 19 cubits, and the star in the scorpion's tail sets with the sun. You will have deep channels and favorable winds for 10 days. This was ancient logistics powered by celestial mechanics. The Nilometer was the tangible proof, the earthly echo of the celestial signals. It turned the abstract beauty of Sopdet's gleam into a concrete number of cubits, and that number told a farmer when to sow, a pharaoh when to launch his monument's stones, and a merchant when his ship could safely reach the open sea. The sky wrote the message, and the river, measured in stone, delivered the exact words. No brass sextants or polished compasses were found in any pharaoh's tomb. This absence is itself a clue. For the Egyptians, navigation was not a separate craft requiring specialized gadgets. It was an extension of the priestly sciences of timekeeping and sacred architecture. The tools they used were likely the same ones that aligned the pyramids and marked the hours of the night, repurposed with a sailor's ingenuity. We must look not for a captain's toolkit, but in the hands of an astronomer priest on a temple roof. One of the most promising devices is the Merkit. Tomb paintings and texts describe it as an instrument of alignment. In its simplest form, a Merkit was a horizontal bar of wood with a slit carved down its center, mounted on a stand. It was used with a plumb line, a weighted string that gave a true vertical reference. For temple construction, a priest would sight through the slit to align the foundation with a specific star as it crossed the meridian, ensuring the building was perfectly oriented to the cosmos. Now, place that same tool on the gently rocking deck of a cargo ship. Instead of a fixed temple foundation, the target is the ship's own prow or stern. On a calm night, a navigator could set up his Merkit and wait for a bright, known star like Thuban, or one of the stars in Sa's belt, to cross his line of sight through the slit. The moment the star's light shone perfectly down the center of the groove, he knew it was on the meridian, at its highest point. That instant gave him a precise time check from his star clock, and the direction of the star at that moment gave him a true cardinal bearing. The rocking of the ship was a problem, but not an insurmountable one. By using the plumb line to ensure the Merkit itself was level, and by taking multiple sightings over several nights, a skilled user could average out the motion of the waves. It was a tool of profound patience and deep knowledge, turning the slow transit of a star into a stable line on the dark water. Then there is the bay, a simple notched palm rib. In land-based astronomy, these ribs were used as a primitive cross staff. An observer would hold one end of the rib to his eye and slide a crosspiece along its length until the top of the piece aligned with a star and the bottom with the horizon. The notch where the crosspiece settled gave a rough measurement of the star's altitude above the horizon. For navigation, this humble tool could answer a critical question: how far north or south have we traveled? The altitude of a circumpolar star like Thuban is directly linked to latitude. At Memphis, Thuban would appear at a certain height. As a ship sailed south toward Aswan, the navigator would take nightly sightings with his bay. If Thuban appeared lower in the sky, dipping closer to the northern horizon, he knew he was moving south. If it appeared higher, he was going north. It was a crude but effective method for judging progress along the Nile's length, or for maintaining an east-west course in the Mediterranean by keeping a star at a constant altitude. We must imagine these tools not as precision instruments in a modern sense, but as extensions of the navigator's own body and memory. The Merkit framed the star. The bay measured its climb. The data they provided was filtered through a mind trained from youth to see patterns in the night, a mind that knew by heart what the sky should look like at every hour of every festival. The captain was his own almanac, his own chart, and his own clock. The real instrument was the centuries of accumulated observation, passed down in spoken rituals and practical demonstration. The Merkit and bay were merely the physical interfaces, the simple levers used to query the immense, living database of the heavens. The most intimate star charts were not carved on temple walls, but painted inside the coffins of the elite. These are the diagonal star clocks, intricate grids of hieroglyphs and figures that look more like a complex board game than a navigational aid. Yet within these funerary objects lies the key to their nightly timekeeping, a system so precise it could guide a soul through the afterlife and a ship through the blackest night. Each chart is a table, divided into 36 columns for the 36 weeks of the Egyptian year, and 13 rows for the 12 hours of the night, plus an extra row for notations. The stars listed are the decans. These were not the grand constellations of gods, but 36 smaller star groups or individual bright stars that rose consecutively on the horizon, roughly 10 days apart. Each decan marked a week, and its heliacal rising signaled the start of a new 10-day period. But for telling time, the decans performed a different, more immediate function. As the night progressed, a new decan would rise about every 40 minutes. By memorizing which decan was rising at a given hour on a given week of the year, a priest or navigator could look at the eastern horizon and read the time as clearly as if checking a water clock. The diagonal pattern in the coffin charts reflects this slow march. A single decan's name shifts one row diagonally down the chart each month, because its rising time advances by about 2 hours over that period. This was a dynamic, living calendar and clock combined. For a navigator on a long voyage, this knowledge was power. On the open Mediterranean, with no landmarks, the only way to estimate distance traveled was dead reckoning knowing your speed, and crucially, your time on a specific course. How fast is the current? How strong is the wind? You can feel these things, but to convert that feeling into a number of miles, you need to know how long you have been experiencing them. A captain standing on the deck at the second hour of the night would note the decan rising. He would then take a mental bearing from the northern stars. 4 hours later, at the 6th hour, he would check again. The change in the decans confirmed the elapsed time. Now he could calculate. If the wind has been steady from the north for 4 hours, and I know my ship's speed in such a wind, I have traveled approximately this far. It prevented the terrifying disorientation of sailing blind into a void, where one could easily sail in circles or become hopelessly lost. The star clocks turned the flowing river of night into a segmented, measurable journey. Each rising decan was a chime in a celestial bell tower, marking another portion of the voyage completed. This was not speculation, it was a disciplined, repeatable method. The same decan chart that ensured a noble spirit could navigate the 12 hours of the underworld also ensured his trading ships could navigate the 12 hours of darkness, transforming time itself into a map. Deep within the sealed chambers of royal tombs, A different kind of map was preserved. Known to us as the Book of Nut, this was not a papyrus scroll for a mortal journey, but a cosmological guide for a pharaoh's soul navigating the afterlife. Its illustrations are breathtaking in their ambition. They show the goddess Nut, her star-studded body arched over the earth god Geb, swallowing the sun god Ra each evening and giving birth to him again at dawn. But this was far more than a beautiful myth. The text surrounding her celestial form is dense with precise, technical observations. It details the decans, those 36 star groups, and charts their movements through the 12 hours of the night. It describes the mysterious paths of the wandering planets. It even notes the different winds associated with sections of her body, linking celestial regions with earthly weather patterns. This was a master reference, a fusion of theology and astronomy, a divine owner's manual for the cosmos itself. For a priest trained in its secrets, the Book of Nut was a working document. It provided the sacred rationale behind the practical star clocks and nilometer readings. When the text stated that a specific decan rose in the eastern thigh of Nut at a certain hour, it gave that star's movement a narrative, a place in the grand story of regeneration. This narrative framework made the complex data memorable. A navigator priest wouldn't just think, Decan X rises now. He would envision the great goddess, her limbs defining the quarters of the sky, and understand his ship's position within her eternal cycle. The knowledge in such texts was almost certainly restricted, a state secret held by the elite scribes and priests who advised the crown. The captain of a royal expedition to Punt would not carry a copy in his cabin, but he might sail under the command of a noble or priest who had studied its principles. This individual would understand the deeper rhythms behind the stars he steered by. He would know that sailing when a certain decan was in the mouth of Nut was considered propitious, not just because of tradition, but because that decan's position correlated with predictable Mediterranean wind patterns recorded over generations. The Book of Nut encoded a holistic view of the universe where ritual, astronomy, and geography were inseparable. To follow the stars was to travel along the body of a goddess, to participate in the same divine journey that Ra made each night. This sacred context transformed navigation from a mere technical skill into a ritual act, ensuring that every successful voyage reinforced the cosmic order and the pharaoh's divine right to rule it. The star map was a story, and every ship that returned home safely was proof that the story was true. The principles of celestial navigation found their ultimate test not on the familiar Nile, but on the open, unpredictable waters of the Red Sea. This was the route to Punt, a legendary land of wonders from which Egypt obtained frankincense, ebony, gold, and exotic animals. The journey was a state-sponsored marvel, an undertaking so significant its details were carved into temple walls at Deir el-Bahri. To sail from a Red Sea port like Mersa Gawasi's south to Punt, likely the coast of modern Eritrea or Somalia, was to leave the comforting embrace of river navigation behind and confront the true vastness of the sea. This voyage demanded a synthesis of every method the Egyptians had mastered. The first leg relied on coastal piloting, a technique of sailing within sight of land. Ships would move southward, keeping the desert mountains of the eastern shore on their left. The pilots used terrestrial landmarks just as they did on the Nile, noting distinctive peaks, wadi mouths, and coastal formations. By day, the sun's arc provided their east-west orientation, ensuring they did not drift too far from the shore into deeper, more dangerous waters. At night, they still had their northern anchors, the circumpolar stars like Mesquidiu, to maintain a general southerly bearing. But as the voyage progressed, and the coastline might fade in haze or distance, another set of stars would have risen in importance. While we have no direct Egyptian records naming the Southern Cross, it is a brilliant and unmistakable constellation that becomes visible once a traveler moves sufficiently south. For Egyptian mariners venturing below the latitude of modern Sudan, the Southern Cross would have appeared low in the southern sky. Its compact, bright cruciform shape would have been a stunning new landmark, a southern counterpart to their northern bull's leg. Observing its rotation around the south celestial pole, a point marked by a much dimmer star, would have given them a southern reference, a way to check their orientation when the northern stars dipped too low toward the horizon. The true genius of this Red Sea route, however, lay in harnessing a consistent natural force, the wind. For much of the year, the prevailing winds in the Red Sea blow steadily from the north. This was not an occasional breeze, but a reliable engine. Egyptian ships, with their single large square sail, were perfectly designed to run before a following wind. A voyage south to Punt could, in the right season, be a downwind sail almost the entire way. The navigator's role then became one of subtle correction and timing. He used the stars not just for direction, but to monitor the wind's consistency. If the northern stars remained in their expected position off the port side, and the ship's wake was straight, the wind was holding true from directly behind. Any shift in the star's relative bearing would signal that the wind was changing direction, requiring a careful adjustment of the sail or rudder to stay on course. The return journey north, back to Egypt, presented the opposite challenge. Now they were sailing against that same northerly wind. This is where their deep understanding of coastal geography and celestial timing became critical. They likely used a technique called tacking, sailing in a zigzag pattern to make progress against the wind, or they waited for seasonal shifts. The star charts told them when to depart Punt. They needed to catch a period of milder or variable winds, perhaps associated with the position of certain decans or planets, to make the arduous upstream journey possible. Every element was integrated. The coastal landmark told them where they were. The Southern Cross confirmed how far south they had come. The northerly wind, read through the steady position of the northern stars, was their propulsion. And the rising of Sopdet, or the transit of Sa, might have dictated their launch date from the Egyptian shore, ensuring they arrived in Punt when the trade goods were ready and the return winds were most favorable. The voyage to Punt was not a leap into the unknown. It was a calculated application of celestial mechanics, a months-long dance with the wind and waves, guided by a sky that was as familiar over the open sea as it was over the quiet Nile. The Mediterranean presented a different kind of darkness. Here, the Nile's comforting banks vanished into an endless horizon, replaced by a vast, open sea where a single error in judgment could mean a voyage lost forever. Yet Egyptian ships sailed these waters for centuries, most famously on the vital cedar runs to the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon. This journey demanded a new level of navigational synthesis, blending celestial faith with unblinking observation. Departing from the Nile Delta, a captain's first task was to strike a true northerly course across the open water. This is where Thuban, the pole star of the age, became their sole, unwavering companion. By keeping that fixed point of light directly astern, they knew they were sailing almost due north, aiming for the distant Levantine coast. It was a tense, open water leg, a test of nerve where the only confirmation of progress was the slow, nightly climb of Thuban higher in the sky behind them, a silent gauge of latitude gained. But the sea is never still. Currents from the west and variable winds could push a ship off course, a phenomenon called leeway. A captain could not simply set his stern to the pole star and sleep. He had to constantly correct for this drift, and he did so by reading the sky's geometry. Each night, he would use his Merkit or simply his trained eye to note the precise angle between Thuban at the pole and other bright, familiar stars as they rose or reached their zenith. If over successive nights that angle changed, it meant the ship was being pushed east or west off its intended line. The stars acted as a celestial grid, revealing the invisible hand of the current. Correcting course was a matter of steering slightly to compensate, bringing those stellar angles back into their expected alignment, a constant, delicate dance between intention and the sea's will. The true moment of relief came with the cry of landfall. After days or weeks out of sight of land, the first glimpse of the mountainous Levantine coast was a triumph of dead reckoning guided by the stars. But it was only the beginning of a new phase. Once within sight of the coast, navigation switched from a celestial to a terrestrial art. Egyptian pilots carried in their minds a meticulous catalog of coastal landmarks, learned from generations of previous voyages. They knew that sailing north, a distinctive double-peaked mountain marked the bay before the river mouth that led to Ugarit. They knew that a certain stretch of white cliffs appeared only after a long peninsula with a solitary, lightning-struck pine at its tip. This was not casual sightseeing, it was a precise sequence of visual cues, each one confirming their position and progress toward Byblos. Yet even here, the stars did not retire. They became the ultimate check against a different kind of drift, the slow, cumulative error of coastal piloting. Sailing along a coast at night or in haze, it is dangerously easy to misidentify a headland or mistake one bay for another. A savvy captain would use the stars to estimate his longitude, his east-west position along the coast. How? By timing. He knew from temple records in Egypt that a specific lunar eclipse or the rising of a particular decan occurred at a certain hour at Thebes. If he observed that same event from his ship off the coast of Lebanon and noted the local hour by his star clock, the difference in time gave him a rough idea of how far east he had traveled. More routinely, the nightly transit of stars like Sa across the meridian provided a consistent time signal. If the transit occurred later than expected for his estimated position, he was likely farther west than he thought, perhaps having missed a crucial turn into a harbor. The coast provided the immediate details, but the sky provided the immutable framework, the master schedule against which all earthly observations were verified. A voyage to Byblos was thus a seamless braid of 3 navigational threads: the constant North Star for the open sea crossing, the memorized coastline for detailed piloting, and the clockwork stars overhead to catch every subtle error. It was a system that turned the formidable Mediterranean from a barrier into a highway, allowing the cedars of Lebanon to become the sacred timbers in the tombs of the pharaohs. These voyages required a unique kind of mind, one that could hold the entire cosmos in memory. The true pilot of an Egyptian ship was often not just a captain, but a priest, a man who served both the pharaoh and the gods in a single, vital role. He stood at the confluence of celestial science, sacred ritual, and raw state power. His training began not on a ship's deck, but within the secluded courtyards of a temple, learning to read the night sky as one would learn a holy text. For years, he would apprentice under a master, memorizing the precise order of the 36 decans, the diagonal star clock tables, and the subtle seasonal shifts of every important star and planet. He learned the prayers to Sopdet for a bountiful flood and the hymns to Ra for a safe journey. This knowledge was not written down in manuals for common use. It was a guarded tradition, passed orally and through demonstration, ensuring that only the most trusted and disciplined individuals held the keys to the kingdom's mobility. This made the priest navigator utterly indispensable. He was the living database upon which Egypt's wealth depended. When a pharaoh needed granite from Aswan for a new obelisk, it was this man who determined the exact day to launch the flotilla, based on the nilometer reading and the position of Sa's belt. When a military campaign required the rapid movement of troops and supplies up the Nile, the priest navigator plotted the nighttime legs of the journey, using the decans to time each maneuver so the fleet arrived at dawn for a surprise attack. His calculations dictated the logistics of empire, turning celestial observations into concrete actions of trade and war. His authority on board was absolute. The crew might handle the ropes and the rudder, but the priest navigator commanded the course. He would spend his nights on the open deck, not sleeping, but watching. He tracked the slow pivot of Mesgidiu, checked the altitude of Thuban with his simple bay, and noted the hour by which Deccan was rising in the east. Every decision was a blend of observed data and divine interpretation. A sudden storm might be read as the anger of Seth, requiring a quick ritual offering alongside a practical adjustment of the sail. A favorable wind coinciding with the rise of Jupiter might be seen as the direct favor of Horus, confirming the righteousness of their mission. This fusion was his strength. He didn't just know how to follow the stars, he understood why they moved as they did, seeing his ship as a participant in the same cosmic drama that played out nightly in the heavens. To lose such a man was a catastrophe greater than losing the ship itself, for he carried centuries of accumulated wayfinding wisdom in his mind. The priest navigator was the human link between the celestial order of the gods and the earthly order of the pharaoh, a single point of failure and a singular source of power, guiding his vessel through the darkness by a map written in light. Centuries after the Great Pyramids, the celestial knowledge of the priests was carved in stone one final, magnificent time. High on the ceiling of the Hathor Temple at Dendera, a massive sandstone disk presents a stunning snapshot of the ancient sky. This is the Dendera Zodiac, a breathtaking Greco-Roman period masterpiece that captures the entire night sky in intricate detail. While created under foreign rule long after the age of the pharaohs, it is not a break from tradition, but its brilliant, complex climax. Here, the familiar Egyptian gods share the heavens with strange new creatures from Babylonian astronomy. We see the bull of Apis, but also the ram of Aries. The goddess not arches across the sphere, but the 12 signs of the classical zodiac circle the edge in a perfect ring. This is a fusion of two great star-watching traditions, a diplomatic treaty written in constellations. For the temple priests who designed it, this was likely a way to assert the enduring power and relevance of their own celestial science, showing they could absorb and master the knowledge of their conquerors. The zodiac itself is a map of incredible precision. The 36 decans, those foundational Egyptian star groups, are still present, arranged in a circle. The 5 known planets are shown in their correct positions relative to the ecliptic, the sun's path. Even the constellations are oriented to show a specific date, believed by many scholars to represent the sky around 50 BCE. This was not decorative art, it was a sophisticated calculational tool frozen in stone, a permanent reference chart for rituals, timekeeping, and yes, navigation. It proves that the core principles, the decanal clocks and the planetary paths, remained vital for nearly 3,000 years. The Dendera zodiac shows us the end result of an unbroken chain of observation. It is the legacy of those early priests who first saw Osiris in Orion and the bull's leg in the northern stars. All their painstaking work, the generations of watching and recording, culminated in this ability to chart the entire cosmic dance on a single slab. It stands as a testament to the depth of their celestial cataloging, a final, glorious star map from a civilization that never stopped looking up, ensuring their gods and their genius would forever be fixed in the heavens. Even the most brilliant star map is useless under a blanket of clouds. For all their celestial mastery, the ancient Egyptians were still at the mercy of the weather, a reality every captain dreaded. A prolonged overcast night on the open sea or a sudden Nile fog could shroud their divine guides, leaving them physically and spiritually blind. This was the system's greatest vulnerability, and it forced them to develop a whole secondary art of navigation, one that relied not on the eyes, but on the body's own senses and the accumulated memory of generations. When the stars vanished, they switched to dead reckoning. This is the practice of estimating your current position based on a previously known location, your speed, and the direction you have been traveling. Without instruments, it was a deeply intuitive skill. A seasoned pilot would stand on the deck, feeling the ship's motion through the soles of his feet. He would note the pull of the current against the hull, judge the wind's force on his face and the set of the sail, and even watch the behavior of seabirds or the pattern of waves. He would then make a best guess, hold that course, and hope his mental calculations were sound until the clouds broke and he could correct with a star sighting. It was an educated gamble, and its accuracy depended entirely on the sailor's experience, but the sky could betray them in a more profound, slower way that no amount of skill could immediately correct. They called the circumpolar stars the Indestructible Ones, but even their domain was not truly fixed. Over centuries, a wobble in Earth's rotation called the precession of the equinoxes slowly shifts the entire celestial sphere. The star marking the north celestial pole drifts. The Egyptians lived through this shift. For over a millennium, Thuban was their reliable pole star. But by the late dynastic period, its position had drifted noticeably away from true north. The priests and navigators would have observed this gradual change, a silent, cosmic drift that would have been deeply unsettling. Their eternal anchor was moving. This required constant, careful recalibration of their star charts and diagonal clocks over generations. The sacred knowledge had to be updated, a quiet testament to their long-term observational dedication, but also a reminder that even the gods' paths were subject to a grander, slower rhythm. Their tools, the Merkit and the Bay, were elegant but limited. A Merkit's sighting slit was wide, and on a rocking ship, aligning it perfectly with a star was an art of patience, not pinpoint precision. The Bay, a simple notched palm rib, could give only the roughest estimate of a star's altitude. These were tools for confirmation within a known system, not for discovery in the unknown. A small error in reading them, compounded over a week at sea, could mean missing a harbor by miles. So how did they overcome these gaps? They layered their methods and trusted in oral tradition above all else. Before a young man ever took a night sighting, he spent years memorizing the river and the coast. He learned the songs and chants that listed every landmark from Memphis to the sea, the color of the water over certain sandbars, the smell of the air near a particular delta marsh, the sound of the waves on a specific beach. This knowledge was a living database, passed from father to son, from master pilot to apprentice. It was their backup drive. On a cloudy night, the captain might not know his exact celestial coordinates, but he might know that if the current feels this strong and the water has tasted brackish for 6 hours, the ship should be approaching the bend with the 3 tall palms. He would then listen for the sound of those palms rustling in the wind, a sound described in a sailing chant he learned as a boy. This was navigation by collective memory, turning the entire landscape into a sensory map. They compensated for the wobble of the stars by carefully noting the new positions and teaching them to the next generation. They mitigated the imprecision of their tools by cross-referencing every observation, a star sighting with a landmark, a solar noon reading with the known depth of the river. Their system was resilient because it was never just one thing. It was a braid of celestial science, bodily intuition, and ancestral lore. When the sky failed, they fell back on the wisdom of the water and the unbroken chain of voices that carried them home. This silent celestial drift connects us to another culture that mastered the stars, but under a vastly different sky. Far across the world, the Polynesian voyagers faced an even more formidable challenge, navigating the planet's greatest ocean with no continent in sight for thousands of miles. By placing the Egyptian methods alongside theirs, we see a stunning parallel evolution of human ingenuity, each perfectly adapted to its own world. The Polynesians also lived by the stars, but their entire cosmos was the open Pacific. They too used zenith stars, observing which bright star passed directly overhead at a specific latitude. An island would have its own zenith star. When that star was at its peak, you were home. This is remarkably similar to how Egyptian pilots used the altitude of Thuban to gauge their latitude on the Nile, a shared global principle of celestial geometry. Both cultures also relied on star paths, memorizing the rising and setting points of key stars as compass bearings. For the Polynesian navigator, the sky was a giant compass rose. They conceptualized a star compass, dividing the horizon into 32 directions, each marked by a specific star's rising or setting point. When their guiding star was not visible, they would steer by the swell patterns, bird flight, and even the taste of the water, layering senses just as the Egyptians layered star clocks with river landmarks. Yet the differences reveal the profound influence of environment. The Egyptians were anchored, both spiritually and physically, to a north-flowing river and a circumpolar sky. Their world had a fixed center, an unmoving pole around which the Indestructible Ones eternally turned. Their navigation was deeply linear, focused on journeys up and down a single, life-giving corridor. The Polynesian world had no such fixed point. Their ocean was a dynamic, island-dotted expanse with no single dominant landmass. Consequently, their star compass had no primary pole star at its heart. It was a fluid, adaptable ring of bearings. They didn't focus on a single northern pivot, but on the entire dome of stars moving around them, a system born from needing to approach a tiny island from any direction. The Egyptians' tool was the Merkit, for alignment. The Polynesians' primary mental tool was the star compass, for orientation in a featureless blue desert. One system was born from the rhythm of a predictable flood and stone monuments aligned for eternity. The other from the rhythm of seasonal winds and the urgent need to find a speck of land in a watery void. Both cultures achieved breathtaking feats of wayfinding, but their celestial strategies were mirror images, one looking inward to a river and a fixed pole, the other looking outward to an ocean and a rotating horizon. This contrast doesn't diminish either, it elevates both, showing that the drive to navigate by the stars is a universal human signature, written in the night sky in two completely different, yet equally brilliant, languages. Their navigation was a silent, nightly performance of geometry. The priest on the deck with his merk, it was not just praying, He was solving a problem in spherical trigonometry using a simple slit and a plumb line. That tool's entire purpose was to isolate a single star at the precise moment it crossed an imaginary north-south line in the sky. This act of alignment was a geometric ritual, creating a perfect right angle between the vertical plumb line and the horizontal sighting bar. When a star like Saw's belt shone down that groove, it meant the star was at its highest altitude, its zenith for that night. The Egyptians may not have written out the cosine rule, but they understood the practical relationship between a star's altitude, the observer's position, and the passage of time. They knew that the angle of that star above the horizon changed predictably as you sailed north or south, and they quantified this change not with degrees, but with the notches on a palm rib or the memorized tilt of a constellation. This was applied mathematics, a geometry of necessity etched into their daily survival. Their greatest mathematical triumph was not in measuring angles, but in mastering cycles. To track the heliacal rising of Sopdet year after year, to predict the Nile's flood within a window of days, required a deep comprehension of celestial periods. They built a calendar of 365 days, recognizing that the solar year and the lunar month did not sync up neatly. This meant their star clocks, those diagonal tables in the coffins, had to be adjusted over long periods to account for the slight slippage between the stellar year and the civil year. They were effectively calculating with an early form of modular arithmetic, noticing that after a certain number of years, the star patterns and the seasons realigned. This long-term tracking of cycles allowed them to plan voyages decades in advance, knowing that a pharaoh's grand expedition to Punt could be timed for a specific planetary configuration that promised favorable winds. Their mathematics was a science of prediction, turning the repetitive loops of the cosmos into a reliable schedule for empire. This celestial geometry found its most permanent expression on solid ground. The same principles that guided a ship were used to anchor a kingdom to the cosmos. The legendary precision of the pyramid's alignment to the cardinal directions is no accident of superstition. It is the ultimate proof of their navigational mathematics applied to architecture. To align the Great Pyramid's base so perfectly north-south, engineers likely used the same method a captain would use at sea on a calm day. They would have marked the shadow of a vertical gnomon throughout the day, tracing its arc. The shortest shadow, cast at true solar noon, points due north. But to achieve accuracy within a fraction of a degree, they almost certainly refined this with stellar observations. They might have used the Merkit to track the circumpolar stars, sighting on a star like Thuban at both its eastern and western elongations, bisecting the angle to find true north. This terrestrial navigation created a monument that was itself a giant, stone compass rose, its corners pointing to the sacred directions. The pyramid was a frozen star fix, a permanent meridian line in limestone, ensuring the pharaoh's tomb was eternally moored to the axis of the sky. This reveals a sophisticated, unified intelligence. The man who aligned the pyramid and the man who steered the royal barge were using the same geometric worldview. One translated angles into eternity, the other translated those same angles into motion. Their mathematics was never abstract. It was always embodied, always in dialogue with the physical world, a shadow's length, a star's climb, the linear bank of a river. They thought in shapes and cycles, not in equations, yet their understanding was profound. They mapped the sky not as a picture, but as a dynamic grid of intersecting paths and predictable returns. This geometric mind turned the chaos of the night into a structured, navigable space, proving that long before the Greeks formalized geometry, the Egyptians were already using it to build their world and sail beyond it. The geometric precision of the pyramids was a beacon that drew the curious minds of a later world. Centuries after the last pharaohs ruled, Greek scholars journeyed to Egypt, not for conquest, but for knowledge. They came to sit at the feet of the priest astronomers, to learn the celestial secrets guarded along the Nile. Figures like Thales of Miletus, often called the first Western philosopher, and the mathematician Eudoxus of Cnidus, traveled to Egyptian temples. They were not tourists, they were students. They absorbed the meticulous, observation-based science that had been refining for millennia, a system where the divine and the mathematical were inseparable. Thales is famously said to have predicted a solar eclipse, a feat that stunned his contemporaries. While the exact methods are debated, his time in Egypt exposed him to their vast records of celestial cycles, their long-term tracking of lunar and solar patterns. He learned to think in cosmic scales, a perspective born from a culture that measured time in dynasties and flood seasons. Eudoxus, who later created the first sophisticated model of concentric spheres to explain planetary motion, gained something even more fundamental in Egypt, a detailed catalog of the stars. The Egyptian decanal system, their mapping of 36 star groups and their risings, provided a structured celestial grid far more advanced than anything in the Greek world at the time. This was not mythology, it was data. The Greeks absorbed this data and built upon it, adding their own philosophical framework and geometric rigor. The Egyptian night sky, mapped for navigation and ritual, became the raw material for Greek theoretical astronomy. Perhaps the most tangible gift Egypt gave to the world was its calendar. That relentless, predictable rhythm of Sopdet, the dog star, dictating the Nile's flood, led to one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, the 365-day civil calendar. While other cultures used lunar calendars that constantly fell out of sync with the seasons, the Egyptians, by tying their year to the heliacal rising of Sirius, created a stable solar-based system. They recognized that the solar year was about a quarter day longer than 365 days, though they did not add a leap day. This calendar was a masterpiece of practical astronomy, a tool for state administration, agriculture, and, of course, navigation. When Julius Caesar reformed the Roman calendar, he consulted an Egyptian astronomer, Sosigenes of Alexandria. The resulting Julian calendar, the direct ancestor of our modern Gregorian system, is fundamentally the Egyptian 365-day model refined with a leap year. Every time we mark a date on our calendar, we are following a cycle, first observed by priests watching for a bright star's dawn appearance over the Nile Valley. Their need to predict the flood created the temporal scaffolding for Western civilization. Their legacy is not merely a list of borrowed facts, but a foundational attitude. The Egyptians demonstrated that the cosmos operated on orderly, predictable principles that could be observed, recorded, and used. They turned the sky from a realm of capricious gods into a readable text. This empirical spirit, this dedication to long-term observation, was their true bequest to the Greeks and, through them, to us. The constellations they saw as divine beings, like Sa and Mesgidiu, were translated into the Greek forms of Orion and the Great Bear, but the stars themselves, their positions and movements, were the Egyptian contribution. They provided the first star catalogs, the first systematic attempts to divide the night into manageable parts, and the first clear linkage between celestial events and terrestrial time. Western astronomy was built upon this bedrock of patient, millennia-long watching. So the next time you look up at Orion's belt, remember that long before it was a hunter's accessory, it was the sacred backbone of Osiris, a navigational beacon that guided ships laden with stone for the pyramids. The line from those ancient river pilots to our modern planetariums is direct and unbroken. Their maps of light, drawn for pharaohs and traders, ultimately charted a course for the human mind itself, steering us toward a deeper understanding of our place in a vast and orderly universe. The stars were more than maps, they were characters in an epic. Every constellation the Egyptians followed was woven into the fabric of their most sacred myths, and this was no accident. The grand story of Osiris, his murder by his brother Seth, his dismemberment, and his miraculous resurrection by his wife Isis, was not just a tale of the afterlife. It was a celestial instruction manual. The god Osiris was the constellation Sa, our Orion. His annual disappearance below the horizon was his death and journey through the underworld. His triumphant reappearance in the eastern sky before dawn was his rebirth. This myth encoded a vital navigational truth, the cyclical nature of the stars themselves. A sailor did not need to memorize complex tables of dates to know when Orion would return. He simply needed to remember the story. The god dies, the god is reborn. The constellation vanishes, the constellation returns. The myth made the astronomy unforgettable, transforming a dry seasonal event into a dramatic, divine narrative everyone understood. This storytelling was a genius mnemonic device for a pre-literate society. The night sky was vast and complex, with hundreds of points of light, but if you could attach a vivid story to a specific star pattern, you could recall its behavior instantly. The goddess Nut, stretched across the heavens, swallowing and birthing the sun each day, gave a cosmic reason for the sun's path. Knowing that Ra sailed his bark through her body helped a navigator visualize the sun's journey, predicting its position at different times. The myth provided the why, while the practical observation provided the how. This fusion meant that every educated Egyptian, from a scribe to a merchant, possessed a basic, functional understanding of the sky. They might not know the precise Deccan rising at the third hour, but they knew the story of Sopdet and the flood. They could look at the dawn sky, see that brilliant star, and know the sailing season had begun. The mythology was a public code, a shared cultural language that democratized essential celestial knowledge. It turned the entire population into amateur astronomers, all reading from the same divine storybook written in light. The sky was not a silent chart, but a talking, storytelling guide, where every god's action was a landmark and every mythic event was a signal to set sail. These celestial theories are not just beautiful ideas. They are supported by wood and stone. The physical evidence left behind by the Egyptians paints a remarkably clear picture of their seafaring world and the sophisticated minds that guided it. One of the most direct pieces of evidence comes not from the open sea, but from the sealed darkness of tombs, exquisite wooden models of boats, placed alongside the deceased for their journey in the afterlife, show us the exact design of their vessels. We see the single, massive square sail, perfect for catching the steady northerly wind of the Red Sea. We see the central cabin for the captain or a sacred statue, and the high, curving stern and prow designed for river and sea. These are not toys, they are detailed, scaled replicas, confirming that the ships depicted on temple walls were real, functional craft. A tomb model tells us the ship could carry cargo and people, but it cannot tell us how that ship found its way. For that, we turn to the texts and the specialized artifacts. The diagonal star clocks painted inside coffins are not theoretical diagrams. They are practical tools for the afterlife, which means they reflect the practical tools used in life. Their very existence proves that the decanal system, using 36 star groups to mark the hours of the night, was a deeply established, formalized science. The meticulous notation of which decan rose at which hour in which week of the year required generations of observation. This is hard data, a working spreadsheet for the night sky. Similarly, the grand cosmology of the Book of Nut, while mythological in presentation, is packed with precise astronomical information. It lists stars, describes their movements, and ties them to the calendar. It is a master reference text, the kind of knowledge a priest navigator would have studied. Administrative papyri provide the logistics. These are the dry, bureaucratic records of the state, and they are invaluable. They detail expeditions to the turquoise mines of the Sinai or the cedar runs to Byblos, listing the rations for the crew, the number of ships, and the officials in charge. One famous text records a massive expedition to Punt during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, noting the wonders brought back. These documents confirm the scale, frequency, and economic importance of these voyages. They tell us that sending a fleet was a major state undertaking, planned down to the last loaf of bread. What they do not tell us is the exact route taken or the nightly navigational logs. We must infer that from the other evidence, this is where we stand, at the intersection of solid fact and necessary deduction. We have the boats, we have the star charts, and we have the records proving they sailed. The logical connection is inescapable. They would not have built such capable ships and mounted such complex expeditions without an equally capable method to guide them. The star clocks and the Book of Nut show they possessed that celestial knowledge. The synthesis is our educated guess, but it is a guess built on a foundation of interconnected evidence. We must imagine the missing manual, the actual spoken instructions from master to apprentice on how to use the merkit on a pitching deck or how to correct for a current under cloudy skies. That intimate hands-on teaching left no physical trace, yet the totality of the evidence the model boat ready for eternity, the star chart painted in a coffin, The scribe's note of 200 sailors' wages converges on a single, compelling reality. These were not lucky gamblers crossing the water. They were calculating mariners, reading a map written in light, their success etched into the very bones of their civilization. But could it actually be done? The theories are elegant, the evidence is compelling, but the ultimate test is not in a tomb painting or a star chart. It is on the water, under the same stars, with the wind in a linen sail. In recent decades, a bold field of research has taken shape to answer that question: experimental archaeology. Scholars and adventurers have moved from the library to the shipyard, attempting to rebuild the past, plank by plank and star site by star site, to see if the ancient methods truly worked. One of the most famous endeavors was the construction of the Men of the Desert, a full-scale replica of a New Kingdom ship based on reliefs from Queen Hatshepsut's temple. This was not a modern yacht with hidden engines. It was built using traditional tools and materials, its hull lashed together with rope in the ancient manner, without a single metal nail. Its great square sail was designed to catch the wind just as the originals did. The goal was not just to build a museum piece, but to sail it, to feel how it handled on the open Red Sea. The crew, a mix of archaeologists and experienced sailors, attempted to use only techniques available to the ancients. They faced immediate and humbling challenges. A ship lashed together with rope is flexible. It groans and twists in the waves in a way a rigid, nailed hull does not. This required a completely different understanding of seamanship. The single square sail was incredibly efficient for running before a following wind, exactly the northerly wind that blows down the Red Sea toward Punt. But tacking against the wind, for a return journey, was a slow and arduous process, confirming why ancient voyages were so meticulously timed to the seasons. The sailors learned that the ship did not steer like a modern vessel. It responded slowly, requiring anticipation and constant minor corrections. This physical experience provided a crucial insight. Ancient navigation was not a series of discrete star sightings followed by passive sailing. It was a continuous, embodied dialogue with the ship itself. Every creak of the hull, every shift in the sail's tension, gave feedback about the wind and current, information that had to be integrated with the celestial observations. The modern crew had to learn to think with their entire bodies, not just their eyes on the stars. This experiment proved the ships were not just river barges, they were capable deep water vessels. But it also revealed the immense, intuitive skill required to manage them, a skill that would have taken a lifetime to master. The voyage of the Men of the Desert showed that the hardware worked. But what about the software, the celestial knowledge? Other projects have focused intensely on the night sky component. Teams have attempted simulated voyages using only reconstructed tools like the Merkit and the Bay, along with memorized star paths based on the decanal clocks. The results are illuminating. They found that with practice, an observer can indeed get a consistent north-south line using a simple sighting bar and a plumb line, even on gently moving water. The key, they discovered, is averaging. You take multiple sightings over several minutes, and your mind begins to filter out the roll of the ship, finding the median point. This aligns perfectly with the idea of the patient, all-night vigils of the priest-navigator. He was not taking one perfect measurement, he was maintaining a continuous watch, his internal sense of the ship's motion calibrating his celestial readings. The star clocks, those diagonal tables, proved to be remarkably effective for timekeeping. Once the 36 decans were memorized, a trained observer could reliably estimate the hour within a window of about 20 minutes, more than sufficient for dead reckoning over a long voyage. The greatest challenge these modern experiments face is the modern sky itself. Light pollution from distant cities bleaches out the fainter stars, making it harder to see the full decanal sequences. And the precession of the equinoxes has shifted the heavens. Thuban is no longer near the pole, and the decans rise at slightly different times relative to our modern calendar. To truly test the system, researchers must use planetarium software to digitally roll back the sky to the exact configuration of, say, 1500 BCE, and then attempt to navigate using that ancient map. When they do, something remarkable happens. The patterns become clearer. The star paths align more logically with known trade routes. The heliacal rising of Sirius once again correlates tightly with the Nile flood season in Egypt. The system clicks into place with a satisfying precision that feels less like theory and more like recovered truth. These modern voyages, both physical and simulated, do more than validate hypotheses. They close a gap of millennia. They transform the priest navigator from a shadowy figure in a text into a real, sweating, calculating human being, squinting through a slit in a piece of wood at a star trembling on the horizon. They reveal the ancient practice not as a mystical art, but as a robust, empirical technology, born from endless cycles of observation, failure, and success. We move from wondering if they could do it to understanding, with a visceral certainty, exactly how they did. The experiments bring the silent stars back into conversation with the groaning timbers of a ship, and in that dialogue, we hear the confident voice of a civilization that knew its way. Their legacy is not a collection of separate skills, but a single, breathtaking synthesis. The ancient Egyptians wove together strands of belief, geometry, and raw practicality into a seamless cord strong enough to pull an empire across the water. For them, religion was not a separate sphere from mathematics, and navigation was not a distinct craft from priesthood. It was all one unified understanding of a living, ordered cosmos. They did not merely sail by the stars. They participated in a divine choreography where every successful voyage on the Nile mirrored Ra's journey through the body of Nut, and every star fix confirmed the eternal truth of Osiris's resurrection. Their world was a conscious echo of the sky, a grand, deliberate mirror. This cosmic perspective is what elevated their methods from simple technique to profound wisdom. They turned the necessity of crossing water into a ritual that reinforced the very foundations of their civilization, proving that to know your place in the universe is to never be truly lost. So the next time you find yourself under a clear night sky, take a moment, look past the familiar constellations and try to see the sky as they did. Find the Big Dipper and see the foreleg of a celestial bull, an indestructible pivot around which the night turns. Locate brilliant Sirius and remember it as Sopdet, the herald whose return once meant life or death for an entire kingdom. In that act of looking, you are not just stargazing, you are reading the oldest map in human history, a map written in light by some of history's greatest navigators. Their ingenuity reminds us that long before satellites and silicon chips, the human mind, armed with nothing but patience, memory, and a profound connection to the world, could achieve the extraordinary. Go outside, look up, and for a moment, sail with them.